Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somersets Safeguarding Children Partnership. Please note, due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed, with the content being designed for an adult audience for educational purposes in order to protect children from harm. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
So, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somersets Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, as you know, we like to bring you quite a wide perspective of topics here at the ThePPod. And one area that I think many people are aware of, which is quite a growing need as time goes on and technology evolves, is around how we police the internet. And so I'm really pleased today to be joined by Detective Sgt. Harvey Ahern to talk about the work that he does and his colleagues do in the ICAT team, which is the Internet Child Abuse team. So, Harvey, thanks so much for coming along to talk to me today. It's really good to have you here and really pick apart this subject because it's a tricky one, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, certainly. Good morning to you and everyone else, Steve, who might be listening. Happy to be here today. Yeah, let's talk about it's a very important issue, I think.
It is, absolutely. So, actually, before we sort of get into the topic, would you be able to start off just kind of explaining for people what the ICAT team is and sort of what you do and I guess what you don't do in relation to sort of internet abuse? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ICAT team, it's the Internet Child Abuse team. That is Avon and Somerset Police's response to sort of like the online grooming and online indecent images market that's out there. And we deal with a really wide range of offences and incidents that come into the office, but mostly, as the name says, to do with the internet and internet-related offending towards children. And it's mostly of a sexual nature as well.
Where would you say that you are sort of alerted? And obviously you can't talk about details here, but where would you sort of typically say you'd become aware of abuse that's taken place? Is it mainly through those sort of internet social media companies? Is it mainly through victims reporting when they become aware of something? Is it some sort of something that is proactively kind of sought out and found, or a bit of a mix? To say, obviously you can't talk about details, but sort of typically where would that you sort of see that coming into you?
There's a wide range of places, as you say, that we would get in. It is a good mix of sources that come into the office, and that will come from social media applications, self-reporting people who are engaged in conversations that they find uncomfortable, where it seems to indicate that a minor is being approached by perhaps an adult account for illegal content, and they will share that information with us and provide us with some extracts of the conversation, perhaps for us to identify people who are engaged in grooming behaviour. Other sources include, of course, people reporting it. We've had quite a small amount of parents who have come into the police station or have reported online to say, actually, my child has been in communication with someone. I found all of this stuff on their mobile phone. I'm not happy with it. Please come and have a look at this for us. And we've had some successful results off of that as well. And then, of course, we do have the undercover side of things where, the police do have a response that they will be in certain places on certain websites where you're not going to know who we are. And we will get referrals in that nature as well. I think I'm able to talk about that because I think people generally know that there are paedophile hunters out there that do exist. And then there are the professional side of it that we run as well with our partner agencies. So we do get a lot of referrals from them as well, and they are very good at that. So I would say be careful.
but rightly so. And,
Yes.
It's in the same way, I would say it in the same way, if you know that there is a lot of street crime, for example, taking place in a certain area, good policing is to monitor that area, is to keep an eye on it, add in extra resources into that area. So actually, if we're not doing that online, then actually we're not policing effectively.
Properly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if there are forums, if there are websites, if there are things taking place that we are aware, the activities taking, surely, good policing and ethics is that we have eyes on in that.
Yeah, absolutely. There shouldn't be an offline public space that the police don't have, ability to have a presence in if it's needed. There shouldn't be an online public space where the police shouldn't be able to have a presence where it's needed as well. You're absolutely right. So we would deal with things, reports of sort of indecent images that have been uploaded to the internet, and people who are in communication with children online grooming, things like that. And then also more recently, we're seeing a big uptick in sort of the safeguarding side of things, where we're having to talk to young people who have uploaded images of themselves to the internet through various social media apps, things like that, and are being reported to us on a more frequent basis. And our job is to go out there and speak to them, provide some educational material, and to provide really constructive words of advice to that child and the parents to enable them to take protective action in the future, and to really assist in parenting those devices and the child's use of the internet as well. I mean, it's very, very easy for a child to become involved in a relationship with maybe someone they know, but also someone they might not know in real life, and to end up sending indecent images of themselves across networks like that. They don't fully understand the ramifications of doing that, and we have to go out there and police that in some way. And oftentimes the parents don't even know, and they're not even aware of this going on, and it's always a big shock to them when we turn up in their door and say, actually, we have to speak to your child about what they've been getting up to online. It's a very worrying thing, and we try and do it in a sensitive way when we deal with children, in a much different way than we would deal with adult offenders of the same spectrum.
Yeah, and thanks for raising that, because I think it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because I think, and I may be wrong in this, it may be sort of more of the public perception, but I think early on as technology evolved and mobile phones came out, and young people suddenly had access to Snapchat and all these other sort of apps these days, and more and more sort of generally kind of termed as, sort of dick pics and the, indecent images, sort of taking those, sending those out and sort of not understanding that. And I believe fairly early on, taking us back a little bit now, there was that kind of, okay, well, they are, technically producing, distributing indecent images of children. Yeah. And I think very early on, you may correct me, that there was a sort of rise in prosecutions for young people who were doing that. But actually nowadays, much more about, like you mentioned, the educational side of things, going actually, no, this is about educating young people about the impact of this. Is that fair to say?
Yes. I mean, certainly when when it was first sort of like going about that people would be sending these images, and younger people would be sending these images of themselves, there was a start. How they started dealing with that was just to deal with it as they would any other offences, which was to go out there and be quite heavy-handed with these things. But eventually you have to ask, is that right? Is that proportionate response to a child who perhaps is engaged in their first ever relationship, and they're still learning, still working out who they are as a person, and how they're going to initiate that romantic side of things for maybe the first time? And if they go about it in perhaps the way that is a little bit questionable, a little bit wrong, is it really necessary and proportionate for 6 police officers to come and boot down the door and arrest them for it? And does it really solve anything? So I think we take the right approach now in younger offenders, in that most of the time it's more about education, online safety, and making them aware of the risks that once they've sent that image, they lose complete control of where it goes and what people are doing with it. And yes, there are some exceptions with younger people who are in relationships or are minded to be more coercive, and there is a really nasty element behind it with some very limited, thankfully, younger people, which we don't see very often, where we will have to take some more proactive action in respect of them. But the vast majority of them, it's just about going and having that conversation, especially with younger girls and things like that. They don't realise perhaps how their images will be used.
And that's quite key, isn't it? It's about that power imbalance, I guess, isn't it? A lot of what we talk about in terms of abuse is an imbalance of power. And
absolutely, yeah.
You know, I know certainly from talking to colleagues in the Youth Justice Service, what used to be Youth Offending Service, they would often talk about that, particularly around this sort of topic, saying actually, you know, if you've got 16-year-olds who are in a relationship, is completely consensual, okay, there's a need maybe to educate there. Yeah. But in terms of prosecution, it's not in their interest, it's not in the public interest.
Yeah.
But where, like say, there's a power imbalance, where there's coercion, control, abuse, then it would be quite a different story.
Yes, definitely. The power imbalance is actually just really pertinent to the way that we look at these things. If we're looking at conversations that are going on between young people and we see that one party is pushy, really not taking no for an answer, and is just relentless in perhaps their behavior, then we have to think, actually, is there something deeper going on here? Is there a dangerous element to this person? And even though they are young and even though they are technically children according to the law, it does happen. It does happen. And a lot of people don't want to, believe or acknowledge that actually young people are capable of some really horrible things. But with the advent, I think, of online privacy as well, and the complete anonymity of perhaps social media and online behaviors, that they feel this relative safety, like nothing's ever going to come back and catch me, so I can just do what I want to this other person. And of course, the other person on the receiving end of their behavior is completely anonymous to them, so they don't actually, most of the time, think about the real life consequences that their behavior can have on somebody else's life. Can be very destructive. And it's not until we knock on the door and say, actually, there is a real person behind this, and you need to think about your actions, and we're going to be taking some positive action against yourself, that it suddenly dawns on them. And you would think it would be quite obvious to anybody with an adult mind that there is someone at the end of that, but actually not to somebody who's perhaps 14, 15, 16.
And there is something there, isn't there, about sort of dehumanizing people sometimes. And like you say, it's like, well, I think you hear it from perpetrators sometimes saying, well, there's no victim involved. I haven't actually done any abuse. There's no victim there. It's just images. It's just video. But like you say, actually not. That is a person there, and somebody who has been abused, and that abuse continuing through the distribution of the images and videos and everything else. So
they lose complete control of their sort of like bodily privacy, their autonomy, and to think. I mean, certainly, if I was, if I had ever been in that position, to think that images of myself were now out there on the internet, permanently copied millions of times and being circulated in forums and darker places on the internet where people are using those images for their own gratification, would leave me horribly traumatized for my life. How on earth do you get over that? I couldn't begin to imagine.
No, I agree. Can I throw a technical question at you?
Go ahead.
If you can't answer it, it's absolutely fine. But I'd be sort of intrigued about this. So, sorry to put you on the spot here.
It's all right.
So if we have a scenario where we have two young people, 17 years old, in a consensual sexual relationship. They are both over 16, so they can both consent to a sexual relationship. They are filming sexual acts with each other, sending it to each other. So technically, as we kind of talked about in that scenario, we're talking about indecent images of children and what have you.
Yeah.
And they're watching it together. If one of those then is a few months older and turns 18, so technically an adult now, and they are still doing what they've been doing and still sitting and watching it together and what have you.
Yeah.
So we kind of step into a territory, don't we, of suddenly we have an adult showing a child.
There is a big grey area in that kind of thing, isn't there, where you've got somebody, where two people who are 16, so can technically consent to all of the sexual acts that everybody else could, but then the images side of things and the video, well, that's 18, and you're sort of in that midpoint where it's like, it's a bit difficult.
You've got an adult and a child in the law, haven't you?
Yes. I think we would look at that, and every case really where that kind of thing happens is looked at individually, and we have to decide, and part of my role is deciding what is the proportionate way to deal with this. Do we know that there is a pre-existing relationship where one party has aged out of being a child, and it's just a natural progression, and the other person is shortly on their way to being an 18-year-old as well? And we have to look at that and think, what is the best way of dealing with that? Because technically, on the face of it, yes, you are looking at a technical adult with a child for the legislation purposes, but we know that there is discretion within every officer's ability to deal with something in the most appropriate way. is it really going to be appropriate where there is a known pre-existing relationship and the parents are quite happy with that pre-existing relationship, and it's been documented that that's something that happened over a long term, and there's no real power, as you say, power imbalance between the two parties. Are we as police officers really going to go in there and disrupt that and arrest people and start criminal prosecutions? No, I don't think so. That kind of thing where we can establish to our satisfaction and to the satisfaction of, our safeguarding partners that actually this is something that can be dealt with by words of advice. Maybe we'll pop around and we'll say, look, these images that you're taking of yourself whilst you're an 18-year-old, you are not. And we need to talk about where those are going and how they've ended up coming to our attention. Because, of course, if they're kept on private phones, they're very unlikely to be coming to our attention. And it's only really when they're shared across some place that is either public or has been shared to somebody else who has reported it to us that it would come to our attention. And that's what we would really base our discussion on. It's like, be careful where you're posting this stuff. We understand how your relationship dynamic works, but you have to think about where this is going and what it is. Yeah, the bigger picture. Yeah. I think there's, and to summarize it all, with where we're concerning young children, it's what is in the interest of the children? What is the most proportionate response? Is that always going to be arrest? No.
Nice to hear kind of a pragmatic approach to these things. Because I guess it must be quite difficult as an officer of the law, needing to abide by the law, but like you say, having that discretion within it. And it must be quite a challenge sometimes for you.
Yeah, and if we can deal with it through an informal disposal option, well, that's still an option that's available to us. And the great thing about, having that discretion is it allows us to make sensible, common sense decisions when it comes to young people and what they're doing. I have no desire in my team to severely impact the lives of young people and perhaps ruin their futures by taking heavy-handed action where I don't think is necessary. So it's nice to have the option to deal with it in a sensible way.
I'm always a fan of a common sense approach, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, when you go and speak to the children, they're not a fan of you dealing with it at all.
I'm sure they're not turning up on the doorstep.
Yeah, but, you have to have a conversation. It's got to be done. And I think that's the best way of dealing with that scenario.
Yeah. No, great. Thank you for that. Sorry to throw that at you.
It's all right. That's okay.
Anyway, sorry, just to take us back then for a moment, sort of talking about yourself and the team.
Mm-hmm.
So I presume, the team was set up at some point because technology.
Yeah.
When was it set up? Is it a sort of fairly new team, or is it sort of an evolution of a previous kind of a team?
Yes, I mean, it was the evolution of a dedicated operation that existed prior to myself joining the force, which was some 7-8 years ago now. And that was, it was a dedicated operation, which was our response to the online world of child abuse. I can't quite remember what the name of that operation was, but eventually it became the ICAT team. And that existed almost solely in Bristol for a long, long period of time. It would be one team that would police all of Avon and Somerset. So you're talking about South Gloss, and all the way down to Minehead and out towards Milbourne Port, places like that, fairly remote. And it was a massive undertaking for one team consisting of about 16 people in Bristol to do, because they had Bristol and Bath, and anywhere out in Somerset used to be like, God, we're going to have to go all the way out there. But,
well, I was going to say, it's fine if you're sitting at a desk and your computer, you can do that anywhere. But if you're having to go from Bristol, like say, down to Minehead or Porlock.
Yes, it's a long way. It's a long way. And so it worked like that for quite some time. And recently they have opened up my area, which is the Bridgewater area. So we're ICAT South, and we look after the southern half of the force area, which is Minehead and Taunton and Wellington, and then also all the way out to Yeovil and places on the more extreme side of Somerset as well. And then when required, we also move up into North Somerset as well, going up as far as Portishead, and that enables the team in Bristol to deal with the larger city areas whilst we take care of the more rural areas. And so we were set up, so I want to say probably about a year and a half ago now.
Okay.
And the team has grown quite a lot, quite fast, as long as the market for indecent images and these online offending behaviors has also escalated. There was that need to have the second team because one team couldn't take on the whole work of Avon and Somerset police's orders. So they brought us into the fold. And we've started with about 6 people on the Bridgewater team, which might shock some people. You think that there's this big team out there dealing with it. Actually, no, there's only 6 of us. Right. And we've steadily grown to 9 with the addition of several other people who have just joined the team. It's a really good team and a really rewarding environment to work in. And there are some really fantastic people in there doing great work. And we might be able to talk about some of the better cases that have come along our desk quite recently, which have been fantastic examples of people really going the extra mile to sort some of these more high-risk offenders out. But we're going from strength to strength, but we are seeing a general increase in the amount of referrals that are coming towards us. In fact, the National Crime Agency has warned us that we are going to get more referrals.
Right. And that was going to be my question, really, because obviously, like you say, in terms of the team expanding originally just from that Bristol-based team to now having kind of more teams dotted around the Avon and Somerset area, such as your team, and then even within that, your team then sort of expanding out from 3 to 6 to sort of 9. Would you say that's as a response to increased awareness or increased demand or both or something else? Because there's quite a growth in a relatively short space of time, isn't it?
Yes, and I believe that is almost entirely due to the demand that is coming through at the moment and what it was, because we did have quite a large backlog of cases at the time, and people were getting quite rightly frustrated by the fact that we couldn't get to these offenders as quickly as we expected. And in the extreme, yes, it did take. There are cases dating back to 2021 that we are only just resolving now with the increase in resources. I think people are quite aware publicly that we've had the HMIC FRS inspection recently, and Avon and Somerset's area for improvement was child protection and child abuse cases as well. And so that really brought into the fold, actually, you need to be doing something more to clear your backlogs. And we were given the direction to clear our backlogs by May. And we've seeing that uplift in resources and numbers, and the uplift with the Southern team as well has really helped us drive those numbers down. We've made huge progress, really positive progress in getting our backlogs under control. And we're getting to the point now, actually, where we are able to meet more strict time limits, especially when we are involving partner agencies who have their own legislation, like their own lawful time limits that they have to adhere to when they consider that there's a child in need or a child at risk. And I'm pleased to say that, with those extra support resources and the support that we're getting now, we're able to better meet those targets. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we can go once we've actually cleared the backlog and we can start doing some real proactive work, because then that's when the magic comes in and the creativity comes along. And I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Absolutely. And if it's okay, we'll get on to that towards the end of this recording. But I know that's how we first sort of started having a conversation, is actually some of that proactive work you were talking about, and sort of how we can kind of work as part of the partnership to kind of get that out. But that'd be great to talk about in a minute, if that's all right. But,
for sure.
So just in terms of the parameters of the work you do, just to understand that. So obviously we've talked about indecent images of children. Where does that sort of scope of your work kind of end, really? I know, are we talking about as well including cyberbullying, harassment, or where does that sort of line stop in terms of what you do and don't do?
So usually we would deal with explicitly sexual side of things. So we're talking from people who are actively looking to meet with children that we have to take a proactive intervention with, to people who are sharing indecent images, and then also down to the sextortion offences, where which is also a growing area as well, where perhaps international offenders will convince children in the UK to upload indecent images of themselves, either through romance scams or through threats. And we'll have to go out and deal with that. But cyberbullying and online harassment wouldn't fall into our territory. And I think we're pretty full on with our job already without having to incorporate harassment and cyberbullying as well. Similarly, something which surprises a lot of people is that we don't deal with the self-organized, I don't know if this is a technical term for it, but the paedophile hunters who self-deploy themselves through a sort of like a vigilante mechanism to go out there and deal with a problem that they perceive that we're not taking any action on, which is very incorrect. We don't necessarily deal with those cases as well because they will require a more immediate response. And when you think about it, that's quite right, in that if it comes in on a weekend, for example, or when our office isn't open, it will go to the team that is on duty at that time, because you do have a real risk there where members of the public have taken it upon themselves, often from sometimes questionable backgrounds of their own, and to find someone who might be quite dangerous and then go and confront them, which of course creates a very explosive, uncontrolled situation. That's a real danger, not only for the people who are going out there and looking for these people, but also the person that has been found, perhaps, that we see. And you see them getting blasted on Facebook by having their videos and images put up. It creates a real risk for them. So it's only quite right that that would go to an immediate response team and be dealt with through the usual channels, rather than coming to the ICAT team, which deals with proactive referrals from online sources, which not all of them I can talk about.
No, sure. And I was probably not for today's recording, but just you were talking about in terms of those, those, like I said, I think self-class of paedophile hunters you see on Facebook and YouTube and this sort of thing. But I presume as well, we've talked about some of the risks with that, but also I guess the bigger risk as well is in terms of jeopardizing court action potentially. Barristers being able to argue sort of a defense based on the actions that they took.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it is something that we have seen. We've had, I think they are actually, now I'm remembering the technical term, from the online child abuse activism groups, I think that's what they're called, right, taking matters into their own hands and not getting the chain of evidence right. And quite often what we see is people who are involved in these groups who would love to get their videos and images out on Facebook for the clicks and the likes and the support that comes along with that. But when the police roll along and say, would you like us to support a prosecution and come to court on that? They're nowhere to be found. They've got what they wanted on Facebook and they've got the attention, and then they disappear. But then we do have more organized ones, which, in fairness to them, do provide packages of evidence that are quite well organized and structured and do provide statements to us, which is extremely helpful. Sometimes the quality of what they've produced is not sufficient for court, and then the court and barristers and CPS lawyers will take into account what happens when these people are challenged directly in the street and they are put out online for the wider public to see. And I have known cases which have not been charged by the CPS because actually they feel that what has happened to the individual that's been targeted by these groups is so extreme and in some cases violent that they've essentially suffered enough, and the CPS have refused to prosecute these cases. It doesn't happen very often, but that is something that is a real risk.
Lots of challenges in your work. Lots and lots of challenges. And we'll get into some of these if we can as we go through this. But and I wouldn't even know where to start with your job, particularly when you say, like you say, we it's quite a wide breadth of abuse and techniques of abuse that take place. Like you say, from anything from a local person sitting at their computer trying to groom somebody they know, right the way through to somebody in the other side of the world, where they are sort of perpetrating quite acute abuse, and it's we'll get into that as we go through if we can, because it must be some real challenges for you.
Sure,
And I'm just curious. You mentioned sort of Bristol there, and it starting off in Bristol, and then sort of setting up the more kind of localized teams. Do you see sort of different themes, different sort of kind of trends that come up in areas, either kind of, I don't know, across, even in Somerset compared with nationally, or even sort of Somerset compared with other regions within Somerset, like Bristol, for example?
Well, Bristol is, it's a very diverse selection of communities in Bristol, more so than you would see in perhaps rural Somerset, which is sort of like majority sort of indigenous population to the UK. So you do see a disparity in perhaps the ethnicity of offenders and perhaps their background, particularly when we talk about perhaps cultures who have come from countries where laws aren't the same as they are in the UK. And even in those cases, sometimes we might take a more proportionate approach to provide words of advice, and say what you're talking about or what you're looking at online is not okay in this country. So I suppose that's the only sort of difference that I would see, other than perhaps the potential age, because of course Bristol and Bath, they've got universities, a lot more students there, a lot more younger people. You might see a more younger demographic in perhaps Bristol and Bath than you would in Somersets, but the difference really isn't very huge. And it's a wide range of people that we come across in our role all over Somerset and Bristol. So I wouldn't say, apart from perhaps the more concentrated areas of younger people and other cultures, I don't think there's a huge difference between that and Somerset.
No, I was going to ask you actually whether, I think traditionally when we think about online abusers, most people probably think about middle-aged man
with the horn-rimmed glasses,
sitting in their bedroom. This kind of. And is that, in your experience, accurate, or is that sort of demographic of that profile of perpetrators that you see? Is that more diverse than that? But also, have you seen that change over time? You just kind of mentioned sort of younger people as well. Is that something you've seen sort of changing over a period of time?
Of course, those sort of more stereotypical perpetrators, they still exist out there, but we are seeing a younger demographic of people also coming into our purview as well. People who have never had an intervention from when they were children, who are now only just carrying on that behavior into their adult years, thinking that there really isn't a problem, and actually now that they're 22, 23, 24, and they're still looking at images of rather young people that they've managed to find online, now finding themselves actually in the crosshairs of me and the team. I think that, it still very much is that stereotypical perpetrator does exist, but we are seeing a rise of people who are perhaps, and this is where we get into sort of like amateur psychology territory, people who are always online, always at the computer, don't perhaps socialize very well with the opposite sex or with their peer groups, things like that, in order to gain the relationships that they normally would throughout their sort of like adolescent years and into adulthood, who are now very much entrenched into the online pornography scene and have never left that scene. And there's a lot of research out there to show that, or to suggest, that I say, that large consumption of illegal online pornography can, over a long period of time, lead to a desensitization where that person is looking for the next high, looking for the next thing that excites them. And it does progress into that darker, more strange territory, and sometimes can progress into the illegal territory. And we do often get people in interview who ascribe their choices online to an addiction to pornography. That is something that I'm seeing more and more often with people who are hardcore users of online pornography, where it essentially activates the same areas of the brain as, say, drugs would do in order to get that dopamine hit. And it's just not enough for them to look at the regular stuff anymore. And now they're branching into illegal stuff, which is something that surprised me when I first joined the team. Because, of course, it's very easy to take the view that actually these people are somehow just
wired differently.
And actually, when you start talking to them in an interview, you can find there is a theme there. But yes, certainly a wide range of people who come into the net.
Yeah. No, I do. It just making me think now. There's several podcasts that I love listening to, and one of them, I don't know if you've ever heard it, called Darknet Diaries. I don't know if you've ever...
I haven't heard of that one. No.
Oh, it's quite interesting. It's quite good, but it's interesting. I was listening to one a little while ago about a guy who, it's an American podcast, but it was a guy who essentially kind of traded in indecent images of children. And he kind of talked through that journey into sort of getting into that. And it was very much about sort of online forums, about the dark web. And initially he had some quite strong sort of codes around what he would trade and wouldn't trade. And it wasn't financial trading. It was more kind of around kind of reputation and the way that people saw him. And initially he had some quite tight boundaries about, okay, I will do this, but I wouldn't do that. And then exactly as you've just said, he described actually how over time that sort of started to blur a little bit.
Yeah.
And that sort of desensitization, and then kind of saying, okay, well, just this one. And then that got lots of attention and from other people. And he said quite honestly, over time, I can't remember the amount of terabytes of images that he had. he said, but it was a collection and it became an addiction. And I had to have these and I had to, share them. And if somebody said, oh, I want a image of this particular type or whatever, he said it was just a fix. It was a buzz that I had that in my collection. And and he recognized, as talking through it, he recognized that actually, that sense of right, of wrong, what was okay, what wasn't okay, just completely went.
Yeah.
And it wasn't he said it wasn't a big sort of active choice of, I am stimulated by these images. Yeah. He said it was just over time, it just became normalized.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there will always be those people that make a black and white choice and just choose to go into illegal activity, criminal activity. But it did surprise me. And there's a fantastic website out there for people who are more interested in that sort of like theory and exploring the psychology of it, called Your Brain on Porn, which is something that's been going for quite some time and was brought to my attention by a colleague in the office to go and have a read of. And actually, when you start going down that, you do start going, oh God, I've seen that. I have seen that. And I've heard that, that explanation given to me in interviews. So this stuff does hold water.
So where do you kind of mainly pick up around this abuse? Do you mainly sort of see it on those sort of mainstream websites, mainstream forums? We talked about sort of social media like Facebook and TikTok and Snapchat, all those kind of things. Do you mainly sort of see things coming through those channels? Do you mainly see it coming through pornography websites that are sort of generally out there you can Google? Or do you kind of see it more on the sort of the darknet side of things, or kind of mixture of everything?
Well, we get referrals from all over the place, and indeed the mechanisms of referral and how we sort of detect these things I can't talk about, but social media is perhaps our largest contributor, and that will be platforms that are self-reporting content on the website that they have proactively gone out and sought to moderate, which we like, and they'll report into us through various channels, and also other people who make those reports to those social media companies who tell us. But overwhelmingly, it is things like Facebook and Instagram and things where children will be, and wherever the children are, there's a market for it. And there are also some sort of select apps and things which are more secretive that we won't mention here, but that people will go to because they know that there's a bit of a market for it on these, and perhaps some of the more clandestine ones which are based out in China who will not talk to us as much, they will go to these platforms. But that's not to say that we don't have a presence there. There is nowhere you can hide on the internet really from the purview of the ICAT and the polit teams around the UK, which is should be a warning out there to anybody who's thinking about going into it.
And I was quite surprised actually that maybe it's just my naivety slightly, but somebody was talking to me recently about how a lot of young people they work with these days will be accessing pornography through some of those mainstream mediums. And in particular, they were talking about Twitter and accessing it through Twitter, which maybe it's my innocent little head here, was thinking, well, surely these big sort of mainstream companies, you wouldn't get it through that. And the reason it was given for Twitter is because there isn't a search history there or something. I don't really use Twitter that much, to be honest with you, but which I was surprised about, because I kind of assumed that young people would be going to porn, Google porn and going to these porn sites. But actually, they're saying a lot of them accessing it through sort of like Twitter. Yeah.
It's unfortunate that it does exist on these platforms. It's obviously not what they were originally created for, but anywhere you sort of put humans, they will find a way to make a devious use of it, won't they?
And I was surprised, even on Facebook the other day. The other day I kind of pulled up Facebook on my phone, and I had some little alerts, and I'd been tagged, and by some sort of random random username sort of thing. And there were 3 random usernames that I'd been tagged by, and clearly sort of porn sites or porn groups or whatever.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how I was tagged, how my name was got, however it happened. But I was thinking, do you know what? I'm an adult, and that's come through to me randomly, and I reported it straight away, and it kind of went. But I thought, actually, if I was a child accessing this, or a young person accessing this, or a vulnerable adult accessing this, actually suddenly you're getting it sort of, it's not you are actively going out to seek it, it's coming to you.
Coming to you, yes. I mean, that's quite common. And even I myself, in my social media portfolio, where it's entirely locked down, basically, so no one can ever find me, still somehow managed to get tagged in mass tagging events of thousands of people on a particular advertisement or something of that nature. And so I'm not surprised that actually people are finding the darker content they're being tagged in as well.
Yeah.
And it's all to generate a market, because out of thousands of people they might have tagged in this particular thing, if only 10 of them come through, well, those are 10 paying customers they might have on the other side of it. And yes, it's unfortunate to say that when you put yourself out there on social media, and if children are allowed to use social media, then they can reach out into the world and find these things. But yes, the world can reach back. And it's not something that actually particularly parents will think about when they just see their child on the iPad or just see their child on the iPhone. And actually, that is a portal to a lot of other people out there who may want to speak to your child. It's not people hanging around the public park suspiciously in big trench coats anymore.
Yep.
It's a much cleverer way of perhaps reaching your children without you even noticing. And it's sat in your pocket. It's sat on the desk at home.
Yeah. Another scary moment for me as a parent there. But,
Sorry.
But you're right though, aren't you? And actually it's often an area that people either aren't aware of or don't really want to kind of fully acknowledge. Because
yes.
they kind of know it's there, but but actually my child's fine. They're all right.
Yeah. It'll never happen to me.
No.
Until it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I was reading a report only last week, I think it was, saying about they'd done a big survey and I think it was 20%, 25% of 4 to 7 year olds, I might be completely misquoting there, now having smartphones and access to the internet.
They call them the iPhone babies now, don't they? I think it's all the iPhone generation.
Yeah.
Where, perhaps it's easier whilst you're doing the dishes or you're cooking dinner, sit here, iPad, entertain yourself for a little bit, and then not actually be aware of what they're clicking on.
Absolutely. But I know I mentioned the dark web a minute ago. If anybody's sort of not aware of the dark web, often people are aware of there is a dark web, but not necessarily aware of what it is. Are you able to kind of summarize that in a kind of nutshell about?
Yeah, I mean, the dark web is essentially another internet that runs, but it's another internet that you need specific means to access. And when I say another internet, it's not like a second layer. Really, all the websites that are out there on the dark web, to my understanding, are on the same servers as perhaps other legitimate websites. But the only way you would ever access those websites on the dark web is to have a particular browser that would allow you to do that.
Right.
And to take you to a particular page that is encrypted in such a way that only that particular browser can access it. So it's not something you could stumble upon just by going through Internet Explorer perhaps and just Googling along the dark web and, oh, you're there, that kind of thing. You have to have a very sophisticated knowledge to be able to go and find these things, to access them. And you're doing it for a purpose, really, because the dark web is very unregulated. And yes, there are some perhaps tinfoil hat wearing members of the public out there who might seek to the ultimate privacy of the dark web. But when we see dark web applications on people's computers in the kind of industry that we work in, we sort of go,
there's a reason.
There's a reason for this.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yes, but that's the essential summary of what the dark web is. A series of internet websites where you would only be able to access them if you had the right software.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be sort of, like say, either Googling or www.darkweb.com. Yeah, we're kind of talking about quite specific URLs that you wouldn't just search and find.
And when we have our dark web training, where we're a professional comes in and will take us to the dark web, it's disturbing how quickly you can find people who are offering to sell indecent images and drugs and in some cases firearms through a mail order, essentially. So it's a terrifying place to go into, really, as a normal human being. And until you actually see what it is, you go, oh God.
Absolutely, because we had things like early on had things like Silk Road, didn't we? Where
that was really, it's a really interesting case, actually. Yeah.
Right, because I know people aren't aware of Silk Road. kind of essentially a bit like eBay, if you like, but for drugs, weapons, guns, the whole shebang. Yeah. Just go in there and buy it.
Yeah, I mean, it's called the dark web for a reason.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And just to add, the reason I mentioned Silk Road there, but the reason I mentioned Silk Road is that it is well known. It was kind of shut down. It was acted upon. Lots of people arrested from that some time ago. But I'm sure over time, it'd be naive to think that other incarnations haven't sprung up and aren't all out there.
It's a difficult area to police because essentially you're just asking us to police the internet. Which is
of the world.
Yeah,
and I know there are a lot of kind of international initiatives that are running.
Yeah,
but still, it's a big world out there.
It certainly is.
There's lots of although there is some good cooperation around the world, there's lots of areas even within society where governments are not coordinating with each other, not cooperating with each other, and actually against each other a lot.
There's a whole system of legislation that exists in other countries that they have to abide by. And if to give an example, perhaps many people might not be aware of, is that sometimes we get referrals from companies like Facebook and Instagram, Snapchat, things like that. And actually, they are based in the US, who have a completely different legal system to us. And when we are given information on a particular person or an account user, things like that, as they are required to do when they find illegal activity on their platforms, that's essentially all we get from them in terms of cooperation, because when we ask for further information, they'll say, off you go to the US court and get a warrant from a US judge, which of course is prohibitively expensive to do for the force. That we only do it in the very rarest of circumstances, because you have to go through mutual legal aid treaties, you have to instruct a US lawyer to go to a US court, and then that then gets taken over to the particular US company, who will then provide you with the information that you actually wanted in the first place. The only problem is you wanted it 2 years ago when you were investigating it and you started the process off.
Yeah. Oh, it's a whole minefield, which is, say, maybe something for another day from here. But yeah, absolutely fascinating when you start sort of diving into it. And that is exactly what we're going to do, because as it turns out, Harvey and I could talk about this subject forever, as there's so much to cover. So join us in a fortnight's time to hear part 2 of this episode, where we delve deeper into the topic and begin to look towards the future and explore the current risks online with current technologies, as well as looking at where this is going in a world of AI-generated images, new emerging technologies, and we talk about the importance of both safeguarding and the law keeping up in an ever-changing world. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with us, we love hearing from you at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. My thanks again to Harvey for taking the time away from his computer to come and talk to me today for this 2-part special episode, and of course, as always, to you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the multi-agency training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.